I will start with my time in Guam. Once my wife and I moved into our house in Guam, we set up the rooms. My son got his own, and we picked one right next to his. After we set up and finally got situated, we got this feeling from our son's room, like somebody or something just wanted us out of that part of the house. So being normal adults, we just ignored everything. But our son would not want to be left alone in the room, kind of like he was in pain or being scared. But once we left the room, he would relax and return to his normal 3-month self. Anytime we would be in his room, the feeling came back. I would pass it off as a new house, gotta get used to it. I never got used to it, neither did my wife or son. The presence in the corner of the room started to take over his whole room. Anytime we would walk past the room from any direction, the feeling would come back, kind of like daring us to confront it. The first confrontation of this ghost was one I'd never forget. It was close to 1 a.m. and everyone was asleep at the time. I was walking past my son's room when I noticed this bright light illuminating the room for a second, then disappear like a flash of light. It might have been an orb, but it happened so fast that I couldn't tell. But there was definitely a flash of light, so I went into the room to investigate. The room was pitch black, except for the window that barely kept the room visible. But what I saw in front of the window still haunts me to this day. Outside the house, there is a tree that faces the window. After making sure that I didn't wake up my son after walking into the room, my attention immediately turns to the tree outside the window. My heart was pounding. I could have sworn I saw a bearded man in a raincoat sitting on the tree, just staring at me. Instinctively, I ran to turn on the lights. My son wakes up crying, and I look out the window at the tree, and nobody is there. My first thought was that it was an intruder, so after calming my son down, I went to my room where my wife was sleeping, gently woke her, and handed her my son. I told her to stay quiet and calm, and I took a baseball bat and headed out the door. There was absolutely nobody on the property, and it was dead quiet. Nothing but the sounds of a calming wind. I even remember hearing owls, but that was it. I went back into our house, confused, but still alert. I remember I was so scared that someone was stalking us that I didn't sleep, and I stayed up the entire night as if I were a soldier. Finally, we get orders to leave, and we were happy to get off the island. Fast forward, and we get our house in New Jersey. My wife is at her mom's house. It's me and my son in the new house. I get the house set up. We had a baby a couple months before we left the island, so she gets her own room with the same crib from Guam. The first night my son and I finally get to relax, we hear the sounds of boxes shifting and stomping on the floor. I brush it off as something fell from a box. When I go up to the second floor room, I open the door. Right across the door is a window, and in the reflection is me and a bald guy that is smiling. I shut the door and thought it was my imagination, so I open it again to make sure. Not surprisingly, nothing was there, but it freaked me out. I went back downstairs to shake it off, and as I sat back on the couch, I saw in the reflection of the entertainment center glass door that same bald guy just sitting on the stairs and watching me like a hawk. Well, I just shut my eyes and opened them again, and he disappeared. Later on down to our time in the house, my kids started complaining of a bald guy walking in their rooms, scaring them, and making them wake up. They came to us, wanting the bald mean guy to leave them alone. So I told them, if he comes back and scares them, to tell him to go away and leave them alone. So I wake up one night to the kids yelling, "Go away. We don't like you." And that was the last of the bald guy scaring the kids. I think that was the time I boxed up the crib from Guam and got rid of it. I would say this is a story of a haunted house, but it isn't. Until about 10 years ago, it was just a haunted house in my book. I met my husband over 30 years ago. He told me about a house he used to live in that had some very strange happenings in it. It was local, but he never wanted to go anywhere near it. He said that it was very old and had been built by a young groom who had some of the wood and granite that made the fireplace sent from Ireland. Anyway, the story is that when he married his wife, she came with her mother, a real shrew. She harped at him and distressed his wife to the point where he went mad and killed them both, then ran screaming that the demons of the house made him do it. My husband's family moved into the house in the early 60s. During the years they lived there, they heard doors closing and footsteps on the stairs, as well as the smell of coffee and frying bacon in the middle of the night. His mother was quite a gardener, but could never get flowers to grow in the yard. He said the whole family was quite uncomfortable in the home and eventually moved. We had been together for a few years when we heard that the property had been sold for a mini storage lot. We were talking about it one evening with my sister and some friends. When my husband told the story, the friends asked to see the house. I'd never seen it to this point, and I'll admit, was more than a little bit curious. We finally talked him into going, and away we went. When we turned onto the street, I got a really creepy feeling, but we pulled up to the house, and I was terrified. There was not a living blade of grass or anything else on that lot. We live in Washington State, and this was March. The house was dark and very ominous. I refused to get out of the car. So did my sister. The guys, 3 of them including my husband, took a flashlight and headed around to the back of the house to see what they could see. After a few minutes, we saw a flash of light on the second floor. In the window on the second floor, they all swear that they saw an old lady's face with long gray hair staring at them through the window. A few minutes later, we saw the front door open, but nobody came out. After a few minutes more, they returned to the car. We commented on the fact that we had seen the light, and they told us they had never turned it on. Then we asked them why they didn't come out the front door. They told us it was locked, and they had tried it before going around back. I was always skeptical about the stories connected with the house, but after they tore the house down, the mini storage was plagued by problems and eventually went out of business. The property sits abandoned and barren. Still nothing lives there, and it's still as creepy as it was years ago. Curiosity led to unknown spirits following me home. Up until the past few years, I became a true believer. I've always felt that I had a special gift, or I could sense energy, especially waves, and other sorts of things. I've had countless moments where I've thought of something random that was about to happen, whether it was a thought, feeling, song, whatever. But aside from that, I know that there are several unexplained factors of this earth, such as life after death. Many of us feel as though we know everything, and are so easy to dismiss that ghosts, energies, and spirits exist. There is so much outstanding proof that there has to be paranormal activity on this earth, along with the dead. Anyway, I've visited some haunted sites, and one of them is in my hometown, and that's a whole different story. But this one time, I went to a place called Dudley Street in Bedford, Massachusetts. Supposedly, there were nuns that practiced witchcraft there about 100 years ago. These nuns were chased down by some guy who hung some of them and others slit their throats. Legend has it that there was a house deep in the woods where these nuns practiced their witchcraft. Ever since these nuns' murders, the house started sinking into the ground. The second floor of the house is now at the ground level. The street begins very normal and thickly settled, with nice houses and fields. But as you keep going, the road gets darker and narrower. As you keep going, you get this creepy, eerie feeling. Ever since, I felt as though I was followed home with that fear. I've seen a few strange things happen there, but not so much until I got home. About 2 summers ago, I was relaxing in my room until I got this overwhelmingly uneasy feeling. I knew I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore this feeling and go to bed. Right when I was laying down, my bed faces the window. I see this huge orb, the width of my fist, floating around my window, then darting in through my room. Too big to be a firefly. I knew it wasn't a car. I knew it wasn't a reflection. I'm not the type of person to blow things out of proportion. I tried to debunk it, but I just couldn't. I freaked out after staying completely still in my room. A few nights later, it was about 3 a.m., and I felt this coldness come over me. I suddenly woke up, and I looked around my room. Then I looked at the corner of my room, and there was a tiny black shadow hovering remotely. It wasn't a shadow of anything, because there is nothing near that corner. I turned on the lights. Of course, nothing was there. Then I switched the lights back off, and no more shadow. I knew I was wide awake when I saw that shadow. Many times in the night, the room will originally be warm, but I will feel something stroking my hair, and a bitter coldness blow against my skin. I've seen images in my mind and in my room of angry faces that weren't just my imagination just before I'm going to bed. I sometimes hear very, very soft voices conversing. I know it's a woman's voice because I thought it was my mom, who was asleep. It was later when I found out that, also according to legend, once you visit Dudley Street, you feel as though you're followed home. This is according to your website too. I didn't know that, but know it makes sense. These occurrences are still happening today. In July of 2008, I went to Sedona, Arizona on vacation with my mother. At the time, I'd been through several surgeries. Although I was not ill, I was in quite a bit of pain, and I hoped that the vacation would do me some good. One afternoon during our stay, we decided to hike around Bell Rock. About halfway through the hike, we stopped to rest and drink some water. We paused for several minutes to look at the view and catch our breath. I was facing away from the trail when we decided to continue on our way, and so I turned around to head back out. When I turned, there was a man standing very close to me in a long blue tunic type shirt. I turned and backed up to let him by me on the trail, but when I turned again, he was gone. I looked around and said to my mom, "That was odd. There was a man," and as I said the words, I felt the coldest chill pass through my body. In July, I became very dizzy and needed to sit down. We found a tree to sit under, and as the dizziness passed, I realized that I was suddenly out of pain. I had no pain. I still felt fairly disoriented, and so my mother was asking me about the experience, and so I told her that the man had been wearing some sort of a long blue shirt, and as I told her this, a large flock of some sort of blue jay or scrub jay with brilliant blue feathers filled the tree. I believe that I was visited by a shaman who knew how to relieve my pain. I lived pain-free for several weeks after that. I've searched for stories of legends of a shaman in a blue tunic, but I've never been able to find anything. If anyone has any information on him, I would love to hear it. I know this isn't the scariest story in the world, but I thought it was the most special experience I've had. Thank you. This is my first story here. I live in a small town in Southwest Virginia. The first story takes place at a business, up a hill, about 50 or so feet from where we live. One night, my brother and I walked up to the business on the hill, above our house. Our destination was a soda machine in front of a garage. While my brother was getting a soda, I happened to look across Main Street, and I noticed something in the shadow of a tree beside the insurance building. I swear, people, I'm not lying when I say it. It was huge. It looked like a shadow person, yet it wasn't human. Now please don't laugh when I say that it looked like a stereotypical werewolf. It proceeded to run on two legs to the nearest shadow of a house and disappeared. I alerted my brother, then we quickly ran back home. According to my brother, the shadow wolves seemed to follow him, even chasing him at times. He can see them in more detail though. They are more solid to him. I remember one night, I was home alone while he was out for a walk. All of a sudden, he was beating on the front door, begging for me to unlock it. I let him in, and he was gasping and shaking. He was scared out of his mind. You could see it in his eyes. When he calmed down, he told me that he heard a loud splash in the creek beside him. He turned to see the shadow wolf lumbering after him up the bank. Another occasion of seeing something strange. It was a bright and sunny day outside. My brother's girlfriend and I were exploring the basement of an abandoned house, which was up the street from ours. The basement was pitch black, except for the spilling in from the openings where the windows used to be. The basement was quite large too, in fact. The girlfriend entered first, curiously looking around. I entered a couple seconds later, my attention drawn to the windows, just as something huge and black jumped through the opening without making a sound. Then, there was nothing there but the woods which could be seen through the window. Before I could relax, it returned, peering in the window like it was lying on the ground. I shudder to this very day when I think about what I saw. It kinda looked like a shadow person, but way more solid than the ones I've seen before. It was human-shaped. I could see no nose or mouth, or even ears. What I could see was its eyes. It had golden cat-like eyes. It just stared at me for a few seconds before it took off. I did feel like it was a bit annoyed at being disturbed. The house we lived in was across the street from the house we saw that being in. Our house used to be a miner's bathhouse or something. I don't really remember the term the locals used. The house had lockers and showers in the basement. It was extremely dark and creepy. I would never go to the basement alone. I even heard that one of the other rooms used to be a barbershop for them. The house across the street from that, I really don't know much about. I do remember an older, dark-haired lady living there when we were little kids. There was a store and an old post office in the building next door many years ago. My brother's boyfriend at the time helped run the store back in the 80s. My uncle and aunt now live in a house near the bank in Auburn Town. When I was a little girl, my best friend Steven and his family lived there. They bought the house and were told that the previous owner, an elderly lady, still haunted the house. They put little faith in the story and never let it bother them. I remember playing in Steven's room and smelling an old lady smell, like medicine and lilac perfume. We never felt threatened by a presence at all. The smell would usually fade away just as quickly as we smelled it. However, one night, after the family had gone to bed, Steven's mother was awakened by the sound of toys making noise in Steven's room. Steven had one problem. He was highly susceptible to nosebleeds. The slightest bump would set off a massive flow of blood. Steven's mother thought it was strange that he was awake and playing with so many noisy toys at once in the middle of the night. Also, the rocking chair in his room where she would often read him bedtime stories was rocking so hard that it was banging against the wall. She ran down the hall to his room, and when she opened the door, the toys went silent. The rocking chair slowed down. She looked at Steven in his bed and saw that his nose was bleeding very badly, and it was going down his throat. He might have drowned in his own blood if the very sweet lady's ghost had not raised such a racket that night. About a year ago, when I was 16, I decided I was sick of sharing a room with my little sister. Because we didn't have enough bedrooms in the house, I decided to move into an old caravan, which was only a few steps away from the back door of the house. I've had many experiences since then, which I believe to be paranormal. I had my dog in the caravan the night that I saw the ghost. When I woke up the next morning, I had the most vivid memory of waking up in the middle of the night. I saw the top half of a man attempt to go through one of the cupboards that are in the caravan, but he was unable to. He fell backwards after crashing into the cupboard and then disappeared. He was elderly, with the top half of his head bald, but with a ring of hair around the back of his head. He was wearing an old-fashioned, light brown tartan jacket. As I said, I only saw the top half of his body, about from the belly button up. My dog didn't wake up at all, and I myself didn't feel neither frightened or threatened, so I feel that the ghost was not evil. When I told my mother, she really didn't believe me, but my dad showed me a picture of his father, who had died about 30 years ago. He looked very similar to the ghost I saw. In addition to this, about 3 or 4 months later, I woke in the middle of the night for no particular reason. As I lay there, attempting to go back to sleep, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the roof of the caravan. My parents gave the explanation of the heat or cold compressing the metal roof, but this doesn't explain why it sounded like human footsteps across the roof. There were about 5 steps, and it sounded sort of like someone was swaggering. This experience did frighten me, and even when the footsteps stopped, I couldn't sleep for hours afterwards. Another night, I woke at exactly 2 a.m. in the morning to the sound of a backfiring car. I pulled back the curtain to one of the windows, which faces the road. What I saw was the outline of an old pickup truck moving very slowly down the road in front of my house. This may sound normal, but it gave me an eerie feeling, and when I lay back down, I could hear the rumbling of the truck for a half hour after that, even though when I looked out the window again, the truck was gone. I found it odd that I could still hear the truck for at least a solid half hour, even after I had passed the house. It felt paranormal to me. This most recent event may not be paranormal, but it is eerie. Just recently, I woke up at 4:12 a.m. I'm still in the caravan. I fell asleep about a half an hour later, but when I woke, I found out that one of my dad's friends had died that very morning. Apparently, he woke up at 4 in the morning, and his wife went to fix him breakfast. His job required an early start, and when she returned about 10 minutes later, he was dead. Is it a coincidence that I woke up at 4:12 in the morning? That may very well be the exact time he died. All these experiences almost began when I moved into the caravan, and although most of them are frightening, the old man's ghost didn't scare me in the least. We don't have any past records on previous owners of the caravan, but I feel that maybe someone has died in there, and a restless spirit continues to be earthbound. When I was 5, I slept in the old camper we owned, and my great-grandma slept in the camper with me. We had the stove light on. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure of a boy. He was holding something, but I couldn't quite guess at the time what it was. Turns out, there was a pair of binoculars and a $2 bill, but it gets creepier. I woke my grandma up and told her that there was someone in the camper. The stove light was off and the doors were locked. She turned a flashlight on and looked around with it. She didn't see anything, so she told me I was dreaming and to go back to sleep. But she had a feeling, not a scared feeling, an odd feeling. The next morning I told my mom, my dad, and my great-grandpa. They just instantly dismissed me and said there was no box of any sort around the house, that they know where they put things and they're not going to believe a little 5-year-old kid. Now get this, and I can understand if some of you are skeptical, because it doesn't sound realistic at all, but I tell you, this did happen. My dad gets a phone call from some guy, but the creepiest part was, it was just a whisper. He just said he needed his box, and he hung up. It was a 15-second phone call, long enough to say that, and it was kind of staticky. I don't know what that meant, or if this means anything at all, but I wonder if that kid grew up and became a ghost, and as he became a ghost, he somehow transmitted his voice to the phone and actually spoke to us. I know this sounds ridiculous, but believe me, it actually happened. Or you may not believe me. But whatever the case, I know my truth, and that's exactly what happened. I live in a place called New Eton in England that has a lot of old history going back hundreds of years. It's also where George Eliot, the writer, was brought up. Well, because it is old, people around here say that there are quite a few haunted places to go to, including Arbury Hall, where she was brought up, and another place nearby called Adsley Castle that is supposed to be haunted by the young lady Jane Grey. You know, the one that was queen for only 11 days, and then got beheaded by the King of England. Well, anyway, here's my story. It must have been about 2.5 years ago now, when me and my friend couldn't get to sleep late at night, so we thought about having a late night jog into the country, towards the ruins of Adsley Castle. As we started jogging towards Adsley Castle at about 1:30 in the morning, I started to feel somewhat scared at the thought of going towards the macabre ruins. Even in daylight hours, it looks eerie and oppressive, and with the 600-year-old church next to it, can you blame me for feeling nervous at the time? So, as we were jogging down these narrow country roads, I was starting to think back to the other times when I've been to the castle in the daytime, and the overpowering sadness of the place, and the cold spots too. Should I go back? I thought. But no, me and my buddy carried on towards the lake nearby, and then towards the old rundown empty village. We started to hear a faint hard tapping sound, like metal hitting metal, coming from somewhere in the village or the church near the castle. Now, due to the situation, we started to feel somewhat scared and apprehensive about approaching anywhere near the village, let alone the castle, so we walked towards the phone box nearby and played around on the phone for a while until we felt more confident. Now, you must remember that this place is in the middle of the country and there is nobody that lives nearby. It was just me and my friend in the greenery of the fields, the darkness of the woods, and the closeness of the ruined castle, church, and village. Anyway, there we were, having a bit of fun on the phone, when all of a sudden, we felt as if somebody was watching us. At the same time, it got very cold in the phone booth. Me and my friend Simon looked out of the plain glass booth all around us, but could see nothing at all, but the feeling was still there. But me and my friend just laughed it off, and said it was all in our minds. So we started to play around on the phone again, until all of a sudden, we heard footsteps walking towards us, getting louder, as if somebody was wearing heavy leather boots, but nobody was there. The footsteps got louder and louder, until they went past the phone booth and on, until they stopped. Now, we were absolutely petrified and scared beyond belief. There was still nobody there. Now the footsteps were coming back again, and doing the same thing all over again. Plus, the sound of the footsteps was getting louder, no doubt about it. By the time we had the courage to run out of the booth and sprint all the way back home, it must have gone past us at least 4 times, and it was getting much louder too. However, just before the last time we heard the stomping, I could have sworn from the distance I saw a man in shining armor, but he looked very transparent and blurry. Like, it seemed like this person was slowly fading away, but you could see him just enough to make out it was a person, almost like a failing projector. It didn't last very long, and I asked my friend if he saw it, but he said no. This story is all true, and I can still remember every detail of that night, like it was only yesterday. When I was between 3 and 4 years old, I shared a home with my mom and dad. There were many nights where I would wake up screaming until my mom or dad would come into my room to calm me down. They were sure that it was my Spider-Man poster on the wall across from my bed that scared me. Maybe they were right. However, one night I will never forget. I was put to bed on the bottom bunk of my bunk bed. It was a hot night, so I leaned up against the wall for comfort because it was cool to the touch. As I was going to sleep, I slid my right hand and arm down between the wall and bed in order to get even closer to the wall. No sooner was my arm and hand dangling beneath the bed than something grabbed it and pulled very hard. I leapt up, freeing my hand and screaming bloody murder. My dad came into the room and eventually calmed me, convincing me that I'd imagined it all. Nothing else occurred that night. And the next day, when I persisted, my dad said it must have been a cat or a bug hitting my hand. I assure you, I knew the difference, even then. Nothing else occurred in this house to me that I can recall. Years later, I was asking my mom about it to see if she recalled the incident. She did, and told me something she never had. She said one night, late, she had gotten up to go to the bathroom. She was pregnant with my sister and having to go several times each night. She walked through the dining room in the darkness towards the bathroom. She said she saw something whitish and misty hovering over the dining room table. She immediately turned and hurried back to bed, scared to death, with the hair on her neck standing straight up. Years later, my friend Kevin was visiting here where I live now, and he brought this new guy along that I'd recently met. We hung out, and later that evening, we went to take him home. To my surprise, he lived in the same house that I used to, where all the strange things had happened. When we pulled into the drive, I asked him if there was anything weird that ever happened there, not telling him that I once lived there and what had happened. He asked me why I wanted to know that, and I told him that I used to live there and thought something strange had happened once. He then bluntly tells me that the house has a ghost and how it opens their back door at night after they shut and locked it. I then shared my tale and was very happy because then I didn't feel so crazy. This was my first encounter with the paranormal, but not the last, and certainly not the most frightening. I'll try to send those later, if you'd like. When I was a young kid, around about the age of 8, me and my family decided to go on holiday to a place called Matlock for 2 weeks. We arrived at this old farmhouse that was built in about the 17th century and looking the worse for wear. Anyway, on about the second night we were there, we started to hear scratching sounds and furniture moving downstairs, but we just ignored it at first and tried to go to sleep. But on the third night, we couldn't ignore it because the floorboards upstairs started to vibrate and the whole farmhouse was literally shaking. It was more worse for me and my brother because we had to sleep on the floor and we could hear strange mumbling sounds coming from downstairs, and the horse in the field next to the farmhouse was making really weird sounds too. The next morning, my dad put it down to bad plumbing, even though my brother and me were getting nervous. Halfway through the day, I was starting to get bored, so I decided to read a few books from the bookcase in the living room. So I sat down at the table next to the bookcase that faced a window and started reading for a while. I remember at the time reading a book called The Iron Man. All of a sudden, I can remember seeing something standing in front of the window. So I looked up suddenly, and right in front of me was a young pale-looking lady smiling at me. She was wearing white Victorian clothes and a straw-looking hat with flowers in it. I remember sitting there, just looking at this lady for what seemed like ages, even though it must have been only a few seconds. So, thinking it was somebody from my mom or dad, I shouted for them to come downstairs. As I turned to confront my dad to tell him this lady wanted him, she had vanished. So my dad went outside and looked all around the field and at the end of the field towards the bog area, but there was no sign of her, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. Now, I think my dad was starting to get quite spooked as well, because now he kept asking me over and over again, and that I wasn't lying about the woman I had seen. I remember on the fourth and last night, hearing all sorts of weird and distorted sounds, coming from everywhere around the room, where we were sleeping, next to my mother and father's bed. I can also remember my dad kept telling me it was a nearby highway that was causing the vibrations to the house, and there was nothing to be scared about. Funny, considering the nearest highway was about 10 miles away. When we woke up the next morning, my dad was starting to pack all our stuff away, ready for going back home. When I asked him why we were going back home so early, he just said that it was because he thought the place was haunted, and he wasn't going to spend another night there. When I talk to my dad these days about that holiday, and about him leaving early because it was haunted, he just laughs and says don't be stupid. But me and my brother know the truth. This is just one of the many weird experiences that have happened to me over the years, and I'll be posting some very more soon to this great website. Thank you. I grew up in a very old house in Mason, Michigan. From the time I could remember on, weird things would happen there. I used to hear footsteps all the time. If I was downstairs, I would hear footsteps upstairs. I always slept upstairs in one of the two rooms. When I slept in the small bedroom, I would hear what sounded like phonographic music, laughter, and glasses breaking. My wind-up music boxes would play by themselves, and I often heard a low male voice say my name. Mine and my parents' pillows would sometimes breathe. Downstairs, we had a sliding glass door leading into a back room, and my parents, visitors, and myself would see a silhouette of a tall man bent over working or walking around. It got so aggravating that we put a curtain up so we wouldn't see it every time we walked by. Sometimes, when we opened the curtain, we would see his face pressed up against the glass. We found out through research that a family had lived there, and the man, John P., had his blacksmith shop at the house. We believe that was the room where he was found dead there by a troop of Boy Scouts. His wife Ida was a socialite and died a very long death upstairs. There was also a woman named Tessa Ann that lived there during that time, and we do not know what happened to her, but we know she had a son named Donald. When my son was a baby, I would often hear a woman's voice in his room talking to him softly, and he would be staring up like there was someone else. One time, I'd come out of the bathroom, upstairs, and saw a woman in a long black dress with sandy brown hair standing in the doorway to the big bedroom. Ida? I saw her and tried to go the other way, but instead, I walked towards her and put my hand out, and she disappeared. It was like I was in a trance or something. Our friends and myself were always nervous about going upstairs for anything, and one time, when my son was very small, I was at the top of the stairs and felt a push. I don't remember the fall, but when I opened my eyes, I was on my back, headfirst down the stairs, and had the baby in my arms still. I have to wonder if something didn't push me, and something else flipped me around to save my baby. May have been a reflex, I really don't know. I would have an ashtray in my bedroom, and would often go in there to find cigarette butts lined up in a neat row on the bed when no one was even there to do it. My friends would leave their keys on the table, and they wouldn't be there when they go to leave. We'd search the house, and later find them where they had been left, even though we already looked there. I had several occurrences of someone knocking on my door, and as I didn't have a knob or anything on it, it would swing open. I'd hear a couple soft knocks. It would open a little, and I'd close it. Then, as soon as I'd lay it back down, I'd hear louder knocks, and it would swing open farther, and this would progress until the door would slam open and hit the wall. We had a lot more than that happen there, but I don't want to get into everything because that would take too long. We did notice that things would get really bad when there was tension between my mother and myself. However, when everything was calmed down, then all was okay. Weird things happen to us everywhere we go, even though we live apart now, and I have to wonder if we don't just attract that sort of thing, give it energy, or something. But I've never had any weirder stuff happen than what happened in the Mason house. I've been raised with the belief that's supernatural. My family has had a long line of being able to see and hear ghosts, and I never really believed I had the ability until I was 10 years old. My mother and we had went down to Kentucky to visit some family that lives there. My mother is from there. We had spent most of the night talking and finally went to bed. Nothing happened throughout the night, but when I woke up in the morning, I saw a sight that I couldn't believe. I want to believe that this was only sleep paralysis, but I truly feel as though this was a ghost. I woke up and rolled over on my back with my eyes still closed. When I opened my eyes, I saw an elderly woman floating above me. She was wearing a white dress and had long flowing hair. I remember she was smiling at me. Well, being 10 years old, I was terrified, so I screamed for my mother. I told her about the woman that floated through the wall and then disappeared. My mother came in the room and felt the cold, but missed a woman. From this point on in my life, I felt and seen ghosts. I'm guessing that this woman was my great-grandmother. The only reason I believe that it is her is because I am named after her, and my mother said that when I was a toddler, I would talk to her. Now, I know this sounds hard to believe, but my mother said that I would say these things that only her and my great-grandmother knew, so I have no choice but to believe this. Thanks for reading, and if this doesn't give you nightmares, I don't know what will. I've been living with a spirit for just over 2 years. I'm an assistant superintendent on a part-time basis, an executive assistant for a recycle company, also a mother and wife. I guess I'm just telling you this so that you know that I'm not someone who has nothing better to do with my time. It all started when a 7th floor resident, who I'll call Bobby, jumped off his balcony and killed himself just over 2 years ago. My sister and I, who also worked here, had to clean up the mess, later finding out that this is supposed to be done by the fire department. His family left a lot of furniture in his apartment. Usually, we give the leftover stuff to the Salvation Army or to a needy tenant. In this case, my sister had just gotten separated from her husband and was in need of a bed. You might think this is kind of morbid. I know I do. She took the bed from the former tenant's apartment for herself to use. In the months that followed, a lot of strange things happened at her place and mine. She lived just down the hall from me. Doors would open and close for no apparent reason. Lights would go on and off. The toilet would flush. I would wake up in the morning to find the kitchen cabinet doors open, and on 2 occasions, the shower turned on. So it sounded like your basic haunting. Last November, my sister moved back to our home country, 3,000 miles over the ocean. A few weeks before she moved, things got worse. Not in the sense that it was dangerous, just that it happened more often. One night, I was down at her apartment with my 2-year-old son. My son was standing in the doorway that led to the living room. He was looking down the hall, as if watching someone walk towards him. It was like he turned around when the person walked past him looking up, suggesting it was an adult. We made a joke of it. I told my son to say hi to the nice man. He turned around and looked in the corner right by the front door and say in his little voice, "Hi." This really freaked me out, so I left. Later that night, I went back without my son. My 8-year-old niece was just leaving to go to her friend's apartment down the hall. As she left, I called out to her to close the door. She did not hear me, and the door stayed open a couple of inches. I was sitting on the couch doing a crossword puzzle and decided to finish my puzzle before going to close the door. 10 minutes later, my sister was in her room getting dressed. She was in the shower. She called me to go and talk to her while she did her hair. I walked to the front door to close it, but it was already closed. This is not unusual. Sometimes this happens. But what I cannot explain is the door was also locked. There is no explanation for this. My sister was in the shower. My niece did not hear me to call her, nor does she have a key or the knowledge to lock the door. It really spooked me. I told my sister, and she also got spooked. She told me she had been hearing noises that did not seem to be coming from anywhere. My sister and I chatted for a couple of hours until my niece came home. I asked her if she locked the door, and she looked at me and said, "Yeah, sure," with my finger, being 8 with a smart mouth. I left about an hour later to go home. At this time, it was approximately 10 p.m. My niece was sleeping on the couch, and my sister was going to finish some painting in the dining area, then go to bed. I'd been home for about 20 minutes when my sister calls me crying. She said that there was someone in her bedroom jumping on the bed. I told her to go and look. She took the phone with her and approached her bedroom. The noise stopped just as she got to the bathroom. When she turned to walk away, the noise started again. She put the phone on speaker so I could hear too. It really sounded like someone jumping on the bed. My sister, trying to make a joke of it, yelled, "Go away, Bobby. Go and spook someone else." 2 minutes later, I heard a noise in my hallway. I was sitting in my computer and looked down the hallway towards the kitchen, and there was Bobby standing just inside my front door. He had on a brown leather jacket and blue jeans, the clothes he was wearing when he died. I was really shocked. I told my sister what I saw and tried to pretend that I was not scared. I said to him, "It's okay, Bobby. You can go now." And then he was gone. My sister was laughing hysterically on the other end of the phone. I tried to calm her down by talking to her, but it did not work. I was kind of glad that she was freaking out, because it did not give me time to freak out myself. I went to my sister and sat with her until the sun came up. Neither of us slept that night. Later that day, we took the bed out to the dumpster at the back of the building, and since my sister only had a few days left in Canada, she slept on an air mattress. That seemed to solve the problem for her, but Bobby has never left my apartment. I do not feel threatened by this presence, but uncomfortable, and my cat is constantly having freak attacks, and my son talks of the man. The stories I'm about to tell you actually happened to a cousin of mine at his college campus. One night, this one guy was lounging around in his dorm while his roommates were out. He was relaxing and reading on his bottom bunk bed when he heard scratchy noises in his room. Wondering what it was, he looked around and didn't see anything unusual. He went on reading again. A few minutes later, the sound started coming around again, just a bit louder. He proceeded to look out his window, where he noticed tree branches hitting the windowsill. Thinking this was it, he went back on reading. The noises stopped just for a few seconds. Then, all of a sudden, the noise came back, and this time, it sounded very close by. He checked out the top bunk and saw a ghostly image of a lady in very antique-looking clothes ran out of his dorm and never came back to live there since. One night, some student decided to have a party on campus. A group of students were on their way to a party when they ran into this girl. She looked like a regular student there, but nobody had seen her before. Anyways, the group tried to get her attention to ask her to the party, but she didn't seem to hear them. They called to her again, but she just kept right on walking. So one of the guys decided to walk up to her. The rest of the group had gone into the building. As she approached the girl, he noticed she was smiling at him. He looked down and saw her face was facing him, but the rest of her body faced the other direction. He screamed and ran back to his friends. The group ran back out and tried to look for the girl, but she was nowhere to be found. When I was little, I used to be able to see spirits. I was never scared of them though. I remember one spirit in particular. Her name was Mimi. Mimi always showed up at nighttime when I was supposed to be asleep. I had a habit of very bad nightmares of people dying, especially my parents. One night, I woke up sweating and in tears when I thought I saw someone standing in my doorway. At first I just saw a mist. That then turned into an old lady. I was able to see through her. At the moment I didn't realize it, but it was Mimi who came back to check up on me, and she had her little dog with her. I watched as she came near my bed. When she was standing right next to me, petting her dog, I felt calmness come over me, and I felt so safe with her there. As she sat down on the corner of my bed, she told me not to fear, that my parents were sound asleep, safe, and sound in their bed. I remember how I still couldn't calm down right away. I was still crying when she put her dog up on my bed with me. At the time, I used to call the dog Pinky, since you could see the pink of her skin under her white fur. I watched Mimi as she went into the hallway and then faded away. I heard from Mimi almost every single night since then, until my 10th or 11th birthday. I'd been playing games with my cousins when we decided to have a race to see who would get outside the fastest. They let me have a head start since it was my birthday. As I headed up the stairs, I heard them right behind me. All the grown-ups were right outside at the time. I ran through the kitchen and went to hit the door handle to go outside, but I missed it. Instead of opening the door, I went through the glass back door. Glass was everywhere. I had cuts all over the place and was bleeding. I ended up passing out, but before I even lost consciousness, I thought I saw a figure of Mimi. It was weird, but then I passed out. Then, when I regained consciousness, I was sitting in a hospital bed, and my family and friends were all around me. They were so concerned, and I was just wondering about what happened to Mimi. I screamed out Mimi, and they were so confused like they didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to tell them in detail, but they just waved me off and dismissed me like it was stupid or something. They told me ghosts definitely don't exist, and that I was just seeing things because of my injury, but I had told them about the bed incident of me being in my room, and they still waved me off like I was nuts. So that's where the story ends. Nothing really came of it, and after that, I never saw Mimi again. I honestly don't know what she represents. Maybe she's a guardian angel. Maybe she appeared in my dreams and I was just imagining it all. Whatever it was definitely a special incident, and I'll never ever forget it. Hello, I'm Kylie, and I'm 14 years old. I'm going to try my best to tell you my entire story without making it too long to read. In the winter of 1980, my mom and her husband, at the time, moved into a house on a friendly, pleasant street. The first day they moved in there, numerous things happened wrong. First off, my sister Cindy ended up finding out that she had the measles. Secondly, my brother Todd had a very high fever and had to be taken to the hospital that night. The electricity in the house would not work, and this made my whole family rather upset. My mom began to resent the house for no particular reason. She complained to her husband about it so much that they ended up violently arguing. He had an emotional attachment to the house in less than a week, while my mom, she was the exact opposite and felt she needed to leave. Regardless of my mom's feelings, she ended up staying there for another 12 years. There are a few incidents that I'd like to focus on particularly. Incident number 1. When my mom and her husband first purchased the house, my brother was just a baby. One night, after hearing sounds coming from the attic, my mom got up from bed to check everything out. Although she did not find anybody or anything in the attic, she did find a man who she can describe rather specifically: blonde hair, brown eyes, and work clothing. He was entering my brother's room. My mom was so shocked to see him that she started to scream and blocked the door to my brother's room. Her husband heard the yelling and came downstairs to see what was the matter, and all he saw was my mom blocking my brother's door. My mom says that as soon as her husband came downstairs, the ghost disappeared. The police came, but did not find any evidence of anyone being there. Incident number 2. My brother, at 5 years old, began complaining that there was a man living in his wall. When my mom calmly asked him why he thought this, he replied, "You know, you saw him when I was a baby. The man who lives in my wall. He eats in there, sleeps in there, everything." My mom was very frightened, but after consulting the child physician about the matter, she was told that I probably had imaginary friends. Incident number 3. I was born in 1985 to my mother's third husband, Howard. My mom tells me that I was a horrible baby who would never stop crying. When I was 3 years old, I became rather curious by the attic, since my parents told me not to go in there. Disobeying them, I went up there instead. An unknown force pushed me into a car seat that my mom had recently stored up there. It locked me in there. For an hour straight, I screamed my mother to unlock me, but she had been outside. When she came inside, she hurriedly ran upstairs and unlocked the seat. I'd never been able to use the lock on that car seat, and it would have been impossible for me to lock myself in there. Incident number 4. My cousin Heather and I go outside to look at the clouds. In these clouds, we spot 2 figures that barely resemble clouds, but instead drawn images. One of a baby, the other of a small dog. We saw them so clearly that we ran inside crying, only to see that our parents were watching the news. That same day, a baby and a dog died together. We had seen the images at the exact same time that the deaths were announced. Heather and I could always see the ghost. He was always around. He enjoyed watching us play with our Barbie dolls. He'd stand right by us as we played. We tried to get him to leave, but he never would. Eventually, we got used to him being there, and we were not frightened by it. We never told our parents about him, because we both felt that he wanted us to keep him a secret. One night, my family came running upstairs because they heard me screaming. My sister says that my screams were so violent, it's as if I was being murdered. When they asked me what was wrong, I told them that someone was in trouble. I told them that a ghost on the wall told me that someone was dying. I also told them that I kept seeing images of babies on my ceiling. My family was very frightened. I slept with my parents that night. The next day, I found out that my teacher, at the time, had been in a major car accident. She was pregnant at the time, which explains the images of the babies. The next incident, my older cousin and I dared my cousin Heather to come into the attic with us. She would not come up there, and so my older cousin pulled her into the attic with me. And once she was in there, she seemed fine. My older cousin headed downstairs, leaving me and Heather to search the attic for my missing doll. We looked everywhere until we heard a loud scream that sounded as if it was coming from a human. We ran downstairs. Our parents, trying to keep us calm, told us it was probably something we stepped on. Incident number 7. I continued to look for that doll in the weeks to come, only to find it outside, torn to shreds. In the other incident, one night, while my sister was watching a late-night movie, the rest of us heard her screaming and ran down to see if she was okay. There was a bat in the house, and it was attacking her. She had a towel over her head and was running from it, shaking and crying. My dad ran after it with a fishing net and luckily was able to get it trapped on our porch. My sister later told us that it appeared from out of nowhere. Later on, my mom runs into the lady who sold us the house. As soon as the lady sees my mother, tears fill up her eyes. She begins to cry and tells my mom how sorry she is for letting her buy that house. She too knew it was haunted and had many bad experiences with it. My mom and her had a big conversation concerning the whole thing, and the lady told my mother that she too had seen a man with blonde hair, brown eyes, and work clothing. We found out from my mom's second husband that the man who built the house died by falling from a ladder. He was not finished with the house, which is obvious. Now that we think back to the unfinished stairway, work clothes, I wonder if he had blonde hair and brown eyes. Now, the story I'm about to relate is unnerving to me. However, to you, it may not be. In fact, it may not have been real at all, but it sure seemed real to me. My mom's mother, Nanny, lived with us for as long as I can remember, so naturally, my brother and I were very close to her. She passed away from bone cancer in October of '93. It was very disconcerting, because the woman she was at the end was not the woman she was in life. In December of '96, I was home for the Christmas holiday from college. I was staying in my old room. My parents were being transferred to Texas shortly, so a lot of things were packed up. My room was completely bare, except for my desk and my bunk beds. My bunks were set up in an L shape. Normally, I would sleep on the bottom bunk, but I had the mattress at school, so I was sleeping on the top bunk. It was about 11:30 in the AM, and I was somewhere between awake and sleep when someone leaned over me. That's when I awoke to the most hideous sight I'd ever seen. It was my nanny, but she had the most messy hair in the world, long, dangly black hair, and it looked like her eyes were bulging out of her sockets. They were red. She was even bloodied on her face. She kept staring at me, and as she stared at me, she slowly opened her mouth, and bugs crawled out of it. A few seconds go by, and I'm finally awake. Or was I? At that moment, I could have sworn I was awake, but apparently I felt like I was sleeping. It might have been a sleep paralysis incident, but I'm not quite sure. It definitely sounds like the details of one. The thing was, I knew that was Nanny. I swear that the woman was in the room with me, and it's a dead certain feeling, not even something that I can't explain. I went downstairs and had breakfast after this happened. While having breakfast, I chatted with my mother about what happened. We both chalked it up to a very vivid dream. Well, this happened the Monday before New Year's. That Wednesday, I took my dad's car and went to hang out with my then girlfriend. We were driving around and had gotten into an argument. I was on an unfamiliar road, and with the combo of not paying attention, I ran a stop sign. As I was running the stop sign, I could have sworn I saw a woman in white standing in front of the car. We were then hit by a car going about 50 miles an hour. The car hit us so hard that it sent our car about 65 to 70 feet and split the radiator in half. The car had hit on my side. The police said that if the car had hit 3 inches closer, I would have been killed instantly. I walked out with a minor cut on my arm and a bruise on my hip. My girlfriend bruised her collarbone, and the other weird thing was that there was other traffic in the opposite lane, and our car did not get hit. How does this all tie together? Well, my mom, the night before I got into the wreck, had a dream about my nanny, so she believes that the experience I had was her protecting me. I know that sounds absurd, considering what I experienced previously was a really dramatic encounter with my grandma. A little background though, my great Nana, my mom's Nana, was a very strong maternal presence. She had 8 children and raised them pretty much by herself. My mom and my Nana lived with her for a long time, so they were very close. My great Nana passed away the day before I was born in a hideous car accident. My interpretation of the facts is as follows. When I was having that experience in bed, and I saw that hideous woman, it was my nanny, and she was in the car crash, so she was showing her form to me. It was almost like a ghostly premonition, and she was warning me of what might come next. Of course, I had no idea what was coming next, and at the time, I was thinking how bizarre it was to have this experience and how freaked out of my mind I was. Then, when I got into my own car crash, I truly believed that I ran that stop sign, and before I even got into the crash, the woman who was there, who flashed before me, was my nanny. Well, anytime my mom or Nana dreamt of my great Nana, something bad would follow within a few days. So based on all of this, my mom thinks that my Nana protected me. I'm not sure what I think. I just know that she was in the room with me that day. As a young kid, I'd often go on arduous walks to the grocery store with my older brother in the summertime. The walk is often an exhausting process because you have to walk up and down a lot of hills and cut through this golf course before you get to the store, which can take an hour. For someone 9 years old, this wasn't such a good idea, especially in July when the humidity around here is at an all-time high. My experience is highly unusual, and I'm not entirely sure what this experience could be classified as, but it's really creepy, and I genuinely believe that if I hadn't gone with this man, I wouldn't be alive today. Confused? Don't worry, you'll understand soon enough. On this particular day, my brother and I decided to head out to the store for another one of our walks. I don't think I drank much water that day, but I remember wanting to go because I wanted to get some snacks. Anyway, about 20 minutes into our walk, right before we had to pass through the golf course, I started to get extremely fatigued and weak. My brother looks back at me and asks if I'm okay. The heat was starting to take its toll on me, and I eventually collapsed. I don't remember how long I was knocked out for, but it definitely seemed like it was a while. But this is where it gets insane. For a second, I thought I had woken up and was just aimlessly staring at the sky. Suddenly, I was staring at this intimidating presence in the sky. It was a man from the early days. He was wearing Victorian-era clothing on, suit and tie, and a top hat. He also had a classic car with him that was also floating in the sky next to him. The car was from the same era as him. Anyway, the man started to reach out his arm for me, signaling me to get into the car with him. I don't remember speaking. All I remember was mouthing the words no, and he started to get increasingly agitated. You could see it in his eyes. Again, he waved his arms, but more violently. It really seemed as if this man really wanted me to get in the car with him, and I wasn't having any part of it. And that's when I figured out what he wanted me to do. This guy looked absolutely infuriated right now, because it seemed like he knew, now, that he couldn't convince me to get into the car with him. He looked at me one last time, pointed at me again with the most angry expression on his face, then simply gave up. He literally got back into his car, even noticed that he slammed the door. When he slammed the door, that's when I woke up. My brother was continuously shaking me, and I felt delirious as I slowly started to get back to reality. I was still near the golf course, sweating, and my brother asked me if I was okay. He said he had performed CPR on me because my heart had stopped beating. Even though he was only 14, his health class had given him CPR training. I believe the man in the sky was a fallen angel, or some dark presence luring me into the afterlife. When I made this realization, it seems his plans to go get me to go with him were foiled, and so, whoever had sent me to go get me would have been upset, and thus, probably why he was upset as well. I believe this was a creepy near-death experience, and I highly believe it was paranormal, a ghost or entity of some sort. Some might say that this could be just a hallucination, but if my heart stopped beating, why did I have this vision? I'm not an expert on NDEs in the slightest, but what I do know is that many people report a series of calmness and peace. Here, however, I felt absolute dread and apprehension. Anyway, who really knows what this really was? But I truly believe that if I went with this mysterious figure, I would have died, and I wouldn't be writing about this encounter today. I don't know if you're interested in stories from around the globe, but I thought I might as well give it a go. I live in Northern Ireland, and have done so all my life. I come from Co Tyrone. This is where my story comes from. After a night spent out, one friend was leaving another friend home to burn Bob and traveling the road from Dugaman through Moy and out another few miles to burn Bob where he lived. It was late and the road was windy, very rural, and old houses scattered around. The roads are bendy and prone to fog patches, and when wet, can be treacherous. The bloke who was driving the car suddenly swerved and screamed. They somehow got the burn bub to my friend's house, and they set him down and tried to get him calm enough to get him talking. He was shaking and sweating, even though it was a winter's night, and we aren't that warm over here in the summer. He eventually said that when he was driving, someone ran out in front of his car. The creepiest part was that he said this person was dressed like a nun. He locked eyes with the nun, who looked at him deep into his eyes with fright for a moment's time, and he swerved to try to avoid her. But when this figure finally reached the middle of the road, it simply disappeared into thin air. The friend traveling home with them hadn't seen a thing, and neither of them drank, so it wasn't that. There wasn't any fog on that particular bend, and we didn't hear about any other stories involving this mysterious nun. Not even about a past accident or such taking place there. We aren't sure if this was just his imagination, but he never really had much of an imagination. We just still aren't sure.
Hey, Phantoms! Welcome to this great compilation. I invite you guys to comment, like, share, and subscribe. And also, I'm already overseas by the time you're listening to this compilation. That's right. I can't get to your comments immediately all the time, but I really want your comments. I don't even know why I said all the time. Guys, just remember, right now I'm currently on vacation and I'm overseas right now in England. But I definitely want to see your comments. I want to see you listen to these stories, and obviously, the recap of this compilation of the past stories of the past month. By the time you're listening to this, it's already full October. I don't even know why I keep saying things that don't even make any sense, but guys, that's the way life is. But before I go, just wanted to say that I love you guys very much, and I hope that you really, really enjoy this video. And I'll be back to talk to you guys very soon when I'm at a computer or maybe a cell phone or something. Well, maybe my cell phone, because apparently I can take my cell phone overseas and they won't confiscate it. Allegedly. I don't know. What am I talking about? Am I even using the right words in the right context? Who knows? Anyway, guys, I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.